to me, it abdicates the responsibility that you would have as a scientist to a community to provide the truth if your purpose going into it is, I want to make the world more just. And I have whatever my vision of just is. Alrighty. I was debating how much of this video to show you all. This comes from the American Geophysical Union's landing program, which is basically their academy for training people in diversity, equity, inclusion in the geosciences and what have you. And this caught my attention, and I had a lot of thoughts. And I wasn't sure exactly how to cover it because I don't want to play the whole thing because it's an hour long. For obvious reasons, I would be going on forever. But there were some things that caught my attention because if you've been on this channel long enough, you would know I had a video early on talking about the concept of actionable science. And actionable science, I think overall, is a good thing. It's a good idea. I'm going to preface this with that. But it does leave me with some concerns and some things that I've been seeing about it, particularly in literature lately. And this webinar is actually a good example of it that leaves me concerned in a lot of ways. Because there's an awful lot of postmodern overtones. And postmodernism and the critical theories that tend to inform a lot of DEI initiatives, or most, if not all, DEI initiatives anyway, have an activism component to them. And if you have been on this program long enough, you would know that there are 4 normative principles to scientific research practice. And one of them is the principle of disinterestedness, which is quite simply that any research should be done untainted by self-motivated interests, which is to say, you're doing science for the sake of pursuing the truth. You're not doing science for the sake of whatever societal interest you may have, societal narratives that exist, or anything of the like. And I'm sure you can already read this here, and it's like, I'm not making anything new. What I'm showing you is straight off of AGU's YouTube channel, and I will put the link in the description. I'm not going to play all of this, but I want to play a couple of things and make the point here, because this has a lot of postmodern overtones. And my main concern with having a lot of the postmodernist overtones, the critical theory overtones in this, and bringing critical theory in here, is that scientists will become more interested in activism and doing things to get a particular answer rather than looking for the truth. And, well, why might that actually be a problem? Think about the fact that if you're interested in giving a particular answer, but the truth about the truth about the question you're asking is not the same as the particular answer you want to give, well, if you're not dealing in reality, giving a community something that is not real, are you not guiding them in the direction that they'd make a really poor adaptation decision? Or a poor planning decision? Or a poor decision, period, given that your advice is not necessarily based in reality, but rather based in your subjective assessment of what you'd like reality to be? Or you're just out and out vision of what reality should be. It's a really tricky thing. And so I want to play a couple of things here. I'm definitely not going to play all of this because there's a lot in here, but I do want to play a couple of things from this video to make some points here and discuss this. So this comes from the AGU Landing Inclusive webinar series, and we will let him say here what the problem is. Hopefully.
Oh, you're muted. How's that? Great. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for organizing this seminar series. It's an important topic, and I'm glad the seminar series exists. Thanks everyone who's here for taking time out of the day to attend this. And thank you for all the work you do on this topic all the time when you're not attending seminars. And finally, thanks for including me. I'm really honored to be here. The title of my talk is Community Science, Science for Justice, a Science for Climate and for Justice. And the point I want to make, I think, is that climate disruption and the destruction of natural systems and social injustice have a long and ignominious and intertwined history. How we treat the earth goes hand in hand with how we treat each other, and exploitation of resources and exploitation of people have long been twin aspects of the same coin.
The note I want to make there with this is, for one thing, science for justice. Um, Science is a process by which we get at the truth. And so I would immediately have to ask what is meant by justice here. Um, because what are you doing then to get to justice? And why are you trying to take science and make it be used for something that it is not necessarily designed to do? It's not to say there haven't been some nasty things. That's not what I'm saying. Not to say there haven't been nasty things that have happened in history connected with scientific practice, but that's a very postmodern thing to be looking at. This is the way we're going to look at the world with justice, right? Um, and that's certainly not the way I view what actionable science could be or what community science could be. But such is the case. I just want to see where is. Okay, there's a section here that I'm trying to find that he actually starts talking about what he thinks the purpose of science is. Ah, yeah, here it is actually. So, um,
This back to climate, taking this back to science, all this reminds me that the goal of our work as scientists, as climate scientists, as Earth and space scientists is not just a resilient future, it's a resilient future that is also just. We're working together towards a world where all people, and actually all of our living relatives, can thrive. And community science is about contributing to that goal, offering science as something, as part of something bigger, being part of a bigger project of building that just and resilient future together. Let me pause at this point and do a proper.
so if you caught that, building, he believes that the of purpose of being a scientist is to build a resilient future that is also just. That is an activism bent. Um, that is very much an activism bent. That is trying to change the world into something that you want it to be. And science being a process by which one gets at the truth, or at least as I would interpret it, and I would argue a fair amount of philosophical literature and it calls it. Um, it doesn't have a moral compass in of its own. And often the people who are scientists of their time act in ways that, of course, if in past acted in ways that we would find today abhorrent. There are plenty of examples of that, but they acted as the people in their time. Not to excuse it. There was a lot of disgusting things that happened. See eugenics, see Trofim Lysenko, see a whole series of nasty things that happened because of scientists. Although Trofim Lysenko, I will say, is a it was a geneticist who really stopped being a scientist because he was such an ideologue. But Professor Krylov wrote about this in the Peril of Politicizing Science. There's another video on this channel I encourage you to check out, talking about the fact that you had some really nasty stuff that went on with certain scientists, and a lot of it didn't end up doing very well in literature and informing much of literature precisely because it was determined to be ideological bunk because they were doing whatever. That being said, here's the question. If your goal as a scientist is to build a resilient future that is also just, in here, which I, for the record, do not take that as my purpose as a climate scientist. That's not what I do not agree with that characterization of my field, or at least my purpose in my field. Thank you very much. Um, but if that is your goal, what do you mean by just is a big important question there, because you're talking about equal outcomes and the like. And how do you define just? How do you define justice? All of this. And what is your argument that that is the purpose of being a scientist, is to make a world just? A scientist, by their own training, by their own talent, by their own training, curiosity, and what have you, is very well incapable of getting at the truth about something. And the truth may be very well that those societal things, such as DEI, for example, that we think make things more fair. However, how do you define fair? Other question. Don't. Like, for example, if you've been around on this channel long enough, there's enough. I made a point of it early on in the channel, pointing out the fact that there's a mountain of studies that show that DEI doesn't work. Or rather, that DEI initiatives are ineffective at best and counterproductive at worst. Made a very good point of making a note of that. Why? Because it's some solid research that makes a suggestion that it doesn't work half as well as people think it does, that it might actually be unjust. But, such things are the case here. But that's the thing is, why do you presume? Give me the justification. And it is never given. And I've watched, in full disclosure, I have watched this talk all the way through once already, and that's why I'm picking out certain segments to talk about, because it's just too long, too much I would want to talk about to do in what video I want to keep short. That is the thing I'm not seeing. What is the justification that the purpose of being a scientist, period, because that's where he started with this, is a purpose of a scientist, period, is to build a resilient future that is also just? We hope that people use the research from science to do that. But why is it the purpose of science to do that? There is no justification given for that. It is just assumed simply to be. And that is a very postmodernist framing, because a lot of the critical theories in postmodernism view it as their job to be activists and change society, rather than to simply understand the world as it is. Understanding the world as it is getting at the truth. Attempting to change everything is not the purpose of being a scientist in me. How can you possibly understand how to even work and move through the world if your first and primary foremost purpose as a scientist is not pursuing the truth? If your first and primary purpose is, for some reason, building a future that is just, again, what is just in that? What do you mean? Give me very, very specific and clear definition. How can you do that if you are not interested in pursuing the truth? That's the curiosity question that I have. How can you do that if you are not interested in pursuing the truth? But that is a very postmodern thing, and that is really concerning, actually, to see from the American Geophysical Union pushing the notion that being a scientist is about what is frankly a activism component that could have some very, very interesting meanings to it that are not made very clear in here. And I'm sure this doesn't necessarily reflect the opinions of AGU, and I'm not trying to characterize it as that. It's just concerning to see it as that represented. But that is one thing I just wanted to say there. There's one other thing I really wanted to mention. And this guy did a lot with pictures, so it's Oh, yes, it was the one immediately after this.
So let me start my personal story. I Westchester University, my first job as a after getting my PhD, after finishing my postdoc, I was interested in community engaged research. I was interested in service-based learning. And I reached out to different communities in and around Westchester, Pennsylvania, to ask if there were projects we could maybe work on together. One of the communities I reached out to, a woman named Zuline Mayfield, amazing local leader who was working with her community to prevent the expansion of a medical waste incinerator in her neighborhood, Chester, Pennsylvania, a predominantly African American community. And she asked if my class could do atmospheric chemistry measurements to help them understand the chemistry of this area and how a medical waste incinerator might influence the air chemistry. And and I remember having a conversation with her and saying, Ms. Mayfield, I don't know if this is a great fit for the curriculum I'm teaching. It's really more of an atmospheric physics class, not an atmospheric chemistry class. Um, the, the, the curriculum really outlines a more theoretical framework for the work, and this is really kind of applied. And she kind of stopped me and said, young man, and I remember that, young man, if what you're teaching is theoretical, why do you even bother teaching it? So that was my first moment. Why do we teach science the way we do? Why is this emphasis on theory above practice? Or at least why had I learned that emphasis on theory above practice? And what could I start to do to unlearn that and to build that into my own career, my own teaching?
So you notice that the actual question there is not, and I'm gonna, yeah, why the emphasis on theory above practice? Because we're after the truth. In a lot of ways, we're very much after the truth about something and trying to figure out generalizable patterns a lot of times about the way the physical world works. And this is a point to be taken in this. This is not to say that a scientist cannot and should not be answering societal questions or the needs of a community or anything like that. That is not what I'm saying. But the reason for learning theory, the reason for learning the theory, the fundamentals, the basics, the important basics is to be able to apply them in practice correctly. And also to be able to work on finding the truth about why a physical process happens the way it does. And then take it into the real world. Or learn that theory as part of a real world practice. I actually don't have a problem with that in the slightest. I don't have a problem with that. But the fact that we teach theory, that we teach that you got to learn the basics, is so you can apply it in practice. But also, to put it quite clearly, one of the reasons for the more theoretical framework and what have you is because one of the ways we're getting at the truth of something is to figure out the generalizable patterns that can form a theory that of physically how the world works. Doesn't mean it ends up being permanently that. Sometimes I think it was Albert Einstein who said it only takes one experiment to prove me wrong. And he's not wrong about that. But it is important to recognize that there is a reason we work on theory, not just on practice. I actually do think that the balance between theory and doing scientific research in practice, in a real world setting, in actionable science or community science, is important. But you cannot let what a society wants to be the answer to that question be what your answer is, unless it is the truth. You must always be after the truth, or you're biasing results in favor of what one group wants to hear or what another group wants to hear. rather than actually going after the truth. And you know why I have a problem with that? Because when it comes back to community science, one of the things that can go wrong is the notion. One of the things that can go wrong with that is that if you are not vested in giving the community wanting your information the truth about their question, and you give them something that is based on what they want to hear because of positive relationship, or because you have a preferred society, a preferred activism preference, because you want to make a world that is more just. What do you think happens then when your answer is not actually in line with reality, is not actually true, and you then end up giving someone something incorrect and it comes back to haunt that community later? Doing this idea of actionable science or community science is in that way a tremendous responsibility, and at the same time a tremendous temptation. It's a tremendous responsibility because you are interacting with the community, and the community is you are obviously giving your advice, your knowledge, your expertise, your ability in scientific reasoning to aid in whatever that community's needs are for data analysis information. And that's in general the definition of actionable science: is data analysis, results, evidence, what have you, that is immediately useful for a community or for decision making. And it does not mean just the data and analysis, it's also appropriate information on how to use it. That comes out of actionable science. It's tremendous responsibility because a community is asking you for that information. And so giving something on a societal narrative or based upon your preferences on how you want to see the world develop or what you want the world to be like, which is very much a postmodern thing. And again, I don't know for sure because of the way the talk started, but it's very postmodernist in structure to me. To me, it abdicates the responsibility that you would have as a scientist to a community to provide the truth if your purpose going into it is, I want to make the world more just, and I have whatever my vision of just is. That can end up leading to all sorts of bad things, I would think. And that's why I also say it's a tremendous temptation, because getting engaged to a huge level with a community, which I'm not saying you shouldn't, I'm saying you should, but be very cautious of it. You do run the risk of being tempted to satisfy those societal narratives of others too at the same time, as well as wanting to see it go your own way too for a particular community. There is a serious temptation there. So I guess I would ask the question of the actionable science, the community science thing here. How would you do actionable science in a manner that honors the normative principle of disinterestedness? Meaning that your research done for these communities is untainted by both self-interested motivation and by the motivations of the people that you are working with. Yes, it's their question. Yes, it's a question you've developed with them that you're doing research on. That is a great thing, actually. I really like that idea. But at the same time, it's one to make sure, how do you answer that question while maintaining and honoring the normative principle of disinterestedness? Those are the main things I wanted to talk about with this video, because he actually goes a lot further into this kind of concept and what have you. And there's a whole lot of postmodernist stuff later on about power dynamics and what have you. And that's another clue that it's postmodernism, because postmodernism in principle is a lot more about power dynamics than it ever is about the truth. And actually, if you read on some of the critical theories in postmodernism, a lot of them tend to think that the objective reality is not obtainable or is even desirable. And think of objective reality as undesirable, which again, it doesn't work very well when you're trying to make decisions grounded in the real world. And it certainly is incompatible with scientific practice. But anyway, let me know what you think. I encourage you to go watch the video. Here, of course, it will be linked in the description. And that would be my whole set of questions, because I don't think this is so interested in the pursuit of the truth. Because, like I said, I do not share that vision as being my purpose as a climate scientist myself, at least in my professional capacity. Um, or at least in my professional capacity and in my opinion, I do not share that as the purpose of science, and I would like to see him justify that as being the correct and proper purpose of science. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. And go watch the rest of this. I just clipped a little bit out to talk about because there were some interesting points that I wanted to talk about from this video. But I encourage you to go watch the rest of it. Again, it will be linked in the description. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious, everybody.